Philanthropy Network. He's a highly experienced and passionate executive with over 7 years progressive experience in organizational management, policy formulation, implementation, partnerships, budgeting, and financial management, among others. And so, Evans, you're welcome. We are also joined by Mosun Layode. Mosun is a development professional with 2 decades of experience in international development and nonprofit leadership. She currently serves as the executive director of the Africa Philanthropy Forum, where she works extensively across Africa with established and emerging philanthropists who are committed to the sustainable and inclusive development in Africa. Mosun just completed a big conference that took part last week, and it's a pleasure for us to welcome Mosun to share some of the experiences and the outcomes of that big conference and the way forward in terms of the topic that we will be discussing. There was a whole day that was dedicated to philanthropy and food systems. We are also joined by Cesar Ngule. Cesar works currently with the Kenya Community Development Foundation as the programs director. He is an experienced and skilled project management professional with demonstrable experience in planning, structuring, leading, and executing projects and programs of high impact. And lastly, we are joined by Gima Foje. He is the acting executive director of the T.Y. Danjuma Foundation in Nigeria. He's highly experienced in grants administration and nonprofit management with a demonstrated history of working effectively with nonprofits to implement results-oriented and sustainable projects. So this is how we are going to do this. We'll start by giving the panelists an opportunity to each talk a bit about the work that they are doing in this area, but obviously locating it within some of the guiding questions that we have shared with the panelists. So firstly, in your work over the last 10 months of global response, what have been the common recovery practices that have been followed by institutions that are seeking support to address the food security crisis? And pivoting from being prepared, where do you believe the opportunities lie for long-term effect responses? And so we'll start with Evans and give you 6 to 8 minutes to make your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Prof. My very sincere appreciation to CAPSI and the other partners in finding it necessary to have us as EAPN in this very crucial conversation. My name is Evans, as has been introduced, and I work with the East Africa Philanthropy Network. We are a voluntary membership organization of trusts and foundations that promote and support philanthropy in East Africa. And we focus on majorly 3 things. We focus on developing knowledge and managing knowledge. We focus on building alliances, and we focus on the influencing agenda that is around enabling environment for the success of philanthropy in East Africa. Coming back to the conversation of today, as a network, let me start by saying that our mandate is to provide a platform where members and the general philanthropy actors can meet, share, learn, and network. And so, on the topic of today, one of the responsibilities that we have played very well as a network to just bring the various actors, specifically around this topic of today, around security, bringing them together to discuss issues around how we bridge the gap that has existed between the production, which has hugely been affected by COVID-19, and the demand, which has even grown with people staying at home and just eating. So we have been providing that platform where these guys and organizations can sit, learn from each other, share valuable opportunities, and just get to brainstorm how best to support food security concerns that we are having in this region of the world. The second that we have been doing since the onset of COVID-19 has been around converting those conversations that we have been having into relevant and impactful partnerships. So we have been working very closely with our members, majority of them serve in philanthropy space. Majority of them.
Can I check with you whether you have got two devices, because there's an echo that's coming from your end?
Prof, I can't hear you.
I'm saying I want to check whether you have two devices open, because there's an echo that is coming from your end.
I can't hear you, Prof.
Okay, proceed.
Let me change my gadget. I can't hear you. Just try to change what's the problem on my end.
Evans, you're on mute, Evans.
Can you hear me now?
There's an echo.
All right, Prof. Can you now hear me? All right. So I've changed. All right. So where did you hear me last, so that I can pick it up from there?
You might want to just recap everything, because there was a huge echo. People might not have really understood what you were saying.
All right. So I was saying that being that we serve in a network of organizations, one of the primary roles and responsibilities that we have been playing is around providing platforms where the various actors in the philanthropy space, specifically those serving around food security and agricultural sustainability, we have been providing platforms where they can sit together, network together, share available opportunities and challenges together as actors in the space. So that's one of the roles that we have been playing. Secondly, I also said that we have been trying to converting those conversations into meaningful partnerships. So we have been trying to connect the government side with the philanthropy side, looking at the challenges which exist within this part of the region around food security. The third issue that we have been talking about and facilitating meaningful engagement around is around provision of knowledge. So we have been partnering very closely with our members to just see what amount of knowledge we can supply to the sector in terms of facilitating these conversations, identifying the available opportunities and the gaps that exist to enable those partnerships address those challenges that we have been talking about. The last thing, Prof and team, is that we have been looking at alternative ways of financing the gaps that have existed in the food security conversation. So in all these webinars that we have been having, one of the challenges has been around financing. So we have also been engaging our members and other actors in the space around exploring alternative financing models. For example, we have been engaging as late as last week around blended finance. So how do we bring the private sector, philanthropy, government into unlocking private capital to support the gaps that exist within the food security and the chain that comes with it. So we have been looking into that. And lastly, is just around ensuring that philanthropy craft the necessary partnerships that then support in addressing the issues that have been arising around the conversations on food security within the philanthropy space. I think, Prof, I'll stop there for now so that we'll come back into the nitty-gritties of what I've just shared. Thanks. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Evans. Let me invite Mosun to respond more or less to the same questions around, what over the last 10 months you have seen as ways of the response that has been shown, and what have been the common recovery practices followed by organizations seeking support to address the crisis. And also to talk a bit about some of the opportunities that are ahead in terms of long-term effective responses. But of course, like we discussed, we want you to locate this within the recent conference that you held, which was so highly successful. Over to you, Mosun.
Thank you very much, Becky, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm with the African Philanthropy Forum, and we walk around the continent with footprints in 13 countries around the continent at the moment, and we're excited about expanding in the coming years. I would say that this is a topic that I became really familiar with in the last couple of months as we're planning our conference. But before I talk about how we got into this whole process of planning the conference and looking at food security, I just want to quickly touch on the point of what has happened in the past 10 months. And we know that our lives are no longer the same. We have changed significantly across the world since the pandemic started. And the good news for Africa, well, it's mixed blessings, because this has hit us. People have passed, but we haven't seen the drastic the health impact the way the world had anticipated, and we've been spared the worst of that. But what we have seen is the economic impact of the pandemic across the continent, which has exposed the fragility of our systems, especially with regards to our health systems and our social safety net. And I'm sure that everyone around the continent, or many people on this call, one way or another, had to contribute to a food drive, especially in the earlier days of the pandemic. And interestingly, I was having a conversation with one of the coalitions that we have I'm based in Nigeria, even though we work across the continent. One of the coalitions that we have in Nigeria, I was having a conversation with one of the lead members championing the distribution of palliatives in Nigeria. And I was shocked to find out that by May, there was no rice that they could buy in bulk. So they had to import rice, and it took about 4 months, I believe, 4 to 5 months for the rice to arrive. So that just goes to show how dire our situation is. And in planning for the conference, which we dedicated day 2 of the 3-day conference to achieving food security in Africa, especially with regards to climate change, one of the key statistics that came out is the fact that by 2025, get this, 2025, which is just around the corner, we're about 4 years away from 2025, it is likely that Africa would only be able to feed 25% of its population. And that is scary if we're looking at the inequalities that we have in our society. And so having conversations during the conference where we're looking at the possibilities of Africa feeding itself and also feeding the world was very instructive, especially as we know that we have arable land in Africa, but we have a lot of challenges, including climate change, which we are not paying significant attention to, including the lack of access to technology that can aid and boost food production, the challenges that smallholder farmers have, the way food security and climate change affect women and children. When we look at malnutrition, it is a whole range of issues when we think about the food security challenge that we have on the continent. But it wasn't all doom and gloom at the conference. And one of the key points that came out is the fact that in absolute terms, we have actually increased production. But then again, because we have these many challenges, the impact is not really felt across the continent. So, and that's where philanthropy comes in, or philanthropists come in to partner with government and to partner with the various organizations that are working across the continent in the food security space. And that is, again, this is such a broad topic. It's not something that we can break down in an hour or in 2 hours. But there are various ways in which philanthropists can get involved. And one is even just creating awareness around and bringing to fore the impact of climate change on food security in Africa. Because we do not take climate change with utmost seriousness as it's done in other parts of the world. And we don't have to approach it the way it's done in other parts of the world in terms of carbon print or the way they're looking at it. And that is not to take away from the importance of that, but we should look at it from the immediacy of the challenges that we have on the continent, which is food security. We have records of drought in Southern Africa. We have floods in Western Africa. We had low cost in East Africa. This challenges are they're enormous, and we need to begin to engage and get the relevant institutions and organizations to the table so that we begin to examine the impact of this on food security and begin to make the necessary changes or take the necessary steps that we need to. There is also the need to support smallholder farmers, who are the bulk of farmers that we have in Africa are actually the smallholder farmers, but then they are unable to produce at scale as they ought to because of lack of training, lack of access to funds, lack of infrastructure, lack of access to technology, just even understanding the weather patterns, rain, all these things that can really help boost food productivity and help the planning process, whereby we're not living from season to season in Africa. I always use my little cousin in the UK as an example, who doesn't understand, when we're going to London and they're asking us to bring certain fruits, and then I say it's not in season. She's in utter shock. She can't understand why something is not in season. But that is how we operate here. We're living season to season, as opposed to producing at scale in a way that we can store and, we have food for multiple seasons. And so we need to enhance and boost the activities of smallholder farmers. And that's where philanthropies do come in to assist with this. There's also something else that came out of the conference was looking at agriculture beyond food production and understanding the economic import of agriculture, because it can really put Africa on the map in terms of feeding the world. If we're able to cultivate the arable land we have at using the right technology, the right tools, and all the right mix of I would say the relevant inputs, that's the best way I can put it at this point, to boost production, then we're able to not only feed Africa, but feed the world. And that gives us an economic edge and economic advantage. And it also comes to the opportunity to provide employment for young people in Africa, because we have a teeming population. Again, another point of discussion at the conference, which we tackled on day 3, is that we have increasingly we're having young people who are unemployed, disillusioned. There are no opportunities for them, and there's so many opportunities in agriculture. And so we need to begin to engage and provide opportunities for young people in this space, and not for them to see agriculture as something that only poor people in the villages engage in. Again, I would use another analogy. I'm Nigerian, and Nollywood is popular for its movies. And I always say that there's a role that celebrities and artists and producers and directors can play in shaping the narrative when it comes to agriculture. Because when they show farmers in these movies, it is some poor guy in the village with a hoe and with holes in his shirt. And that's not how we can attract young people into that space. And the whole agribusiness space is huge. There's so many opportunities along the value chain for young people to get involved. So that came across strongly in terms of the economic potential of agriculture, and also the potential to engage young people. I think the final thing that two things actually. One of the point that I should raise is the impact of food security on malnutrition. And what is likely to happen down the line. Again, when there is inequality in the world, it's and it comes to, and it plays out in the area of food security. It's almost a moral issue or moral failing on our part, because we have children that are unable to get nutritious food that they require to develop, which leads to stunting. Quite a number of us might know about the first 1,000 days, which scientists have said they're the most important days in any child's life. If you can give them all that they need in the first 1,000 days in terms of nutrition, healthcare, in terms of positive energy, being in a good environment, they're really set for life. But when they don't have nutritious food and they're stunted, there is nothing we can do along the line that would make them able to learn and compete in a global world, just because they experience stunting growing up. So that's an area that we need significant investment. We need philanthropists to come on board in terms of working with non-profit organizations and institutions that are working actively to ensure that young children, especially under 1,000 days, get the nutritious food that they require. Finally, for this round of questions, or for the opening remark, another thing that came out clearly is that we've learned a lot through the pandemic. But then we have to prepare for the next one. There will be another pandemic. We were warned about the current one, and we didn't take it seriously. And so there will be another one. There will be another shock. So we need to ensure that we're not caught off guard again. And this is the time to begin to prepare for the next wave, not the next wave of COVID-19, but the next one that is likely to happen. It could be in 10 years, it could be in 3 years, who knows? We're not sure. But we cannot just be caught up in paralysis and trying to figure out what is happening with this one, when we really should be preparing for the next one. And I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Mosun. I really wanted to give you time so that we get the outcomes from your conference, which for those that attended was highly attended, and the discussions were very rich. And so thank you so much for that. We'll come back to some of the pertinent questions. And talking about statistics, more than 60% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa are actually smallholder farmers. And so I think that's an important point that you have made around that. And the agricultural sector contributes about 23% of the overall sub-Saharan Africa's GDP. And listening to what you just said about 2025, it really raises a lot of issues about where we are going as the continent. And as you know, FAO estimates that more than half of the people in the world who are facing crisis levels of acute food insecurity, actually those live in Africa. And so, given where we are with the COVID-19 and the new waves that are actually coming up, and I pray that we don't get into another series of lockdowns, because we have seen what the lockdowns have actually done to our food systems, to the value chain, among others. So let me open up and invite Caesar to also make his opening remarks. 6 to 8 minutes, Caesar, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that, and really the organizers for inviting us. I work for an organization called Kenya Community Development Foundation. And so I want to possibly just share from that perspective that on 27th March, when COVID was declared an emergency, I think the immediate reaction amongst many organizations who are involved in this, in the philanthropy space like ourselves, the immediate reaction was to give food packs, which is a very good thing, because there were people who did not know what they would take for supper, for lunch, and things like that. But after 1 week, 2 weeks of doing that, we began questioning the approach, especially in relation to sustainable food security. How durable was it when people were at home and there was reduction in income levels, and also the pots of money would be running out very soon. And so we began as a strategy, we began wanting to focus more on the advantages, on the opportunities that this presented. And one of it was that in Africa and in many parts of this world, we have land, but there is very little commitment from subsistence farmers in terms of their interest in paying attention to production, whether from an interest or attitude perspective or from a capability perspective. And so there was need for us to begin having an intervention that looks at all the bottlenecks around farmers, around people who have the possibility of farming but are not producing. And then the other thing was is a focus when you go to some of the areas where there's potential for irrigation or there's a lot of potential for agriculture. You find that a lot of farmers really farm for the market and very little for the household's nutritional needs and surplus. And so how do you then begin working with farmers to ensure that people are also producing a balanced diet within their homesteads for their own families? And so even in urban centers, in some of the contexts, not everywhere, but you also have areas where people can do vertical gardens and things like that. And so that was one of the areas that we began investing in the very early days. Then the other thing was the challenge around the market systems that were not working for a very long time. So how do you then begin ensuring that for those who are now producing surplus for markets, how do you ensure that there is a value proposition and the entire value chain does not end up exploiting the farmer who is a producer? How do you come with more social entrepreneurs who are looking forward to making a profit for themselves, but also ensuring that you don't forget the farmer who is making the production by dealing with or taking advantage of more, because of more, there's an increasing positive attitude to use of technology. So how do you use that to do a lot of digital marketing? How do you, where systems are not working or where value chains were dependent on export, and now you have all these lockdowns and things like that, how do you then take advantage of that to ensure that such systems are then serving people within the different countries? And so all this required a lot of change in the way giving happens, but also a lot of interventions or a lot of conversations, like Evans was mentioning, of the entire philanthropy ecosystem in terms of being able to have a healthy balance, because you might not necessarily say you will not give for the immediate, but how can you ensure that corporates who are not necessarily involved in philanthropy, but they want to give meaningfully, how do you create platforms where people can give more responsibly while taking into account the future? The last one is around policy bottlenecks. So again, there's need for, and this really is, whether there's COVID or not, this is really an issue that has really affected the capability of African countries to meet their food obligations for their populations. And one of it is how land rights are structured. So you find that a lot of young people do not own land rights. So how can you then empower young people to renegotiate better with those people who have land, whether it is their parents, uncle, community, or whatever, and so that they are able to either renegotiate the access to the land, or whether you can have laws, whatever system, whatever works in different contexts, to just ensure that people who have an interest, the energy, the resources to do agriculture are empowered and facilitated to do that. So that would be my very immediate contribution, especially in the context of food security. There's a growing youth population, and so again, if we don't take advantage of that, it will be a missed opportunity, because ordinarily when people begin their livelihoods and then you go into employment, a lot of them will then come into agriculture after retirement. But there's an opportunity to ensure that a lot of young people who are very smart and they see a value proposition, they will not get into agriculture if they can't see the amounts of money, income, and things like that they are making, because most of them have gone to school. And so there's need for us to ensure that we create an enabling environment for agriculture to thrive, and especially so for young people who want to engage in agriculture for business. And you see, at the end of the day, it will still mean more food production, more food are available for the population.
Thank you very much, Caesar. And of course, at some point, we would ask you to talk about the foundation itself, because you are working at a community level with different stakeholders. And so some people might want to know more about the Kenya Community Development Foundation and how it has been involved in all of this. Like I mentioned that in the past, we have held several webinars on this topic. And I just want to mention some of the recommendations that have emerged out of that so that we contextualize the next speaker. So, out of the very different conversations that we've had, there's been a suggestion that the private sector should make purposeful efforts to invest in people, to take advantage of resources, to make the strategies and policies of regional economic communities more relevant to the people at grassroots levels, especially in this case, smallholder farmers, informal laborers, but also to be willing to make trade and economic activities possible within the region. And also that the structural changes in our food system, specifically the seed policy, access to common resources of water and land, and regulating the private sector so that smallholder farmers can sell their products in the big supermarkets. But of course, one of the big actors here is governments. And so the idea is that governments should also strengthen the smallholders farmers' land rights through the land tenure and improve smallholder farmers' access to markets, as well as provide financing while increasing investment in agricultural research. Dima, you represent a foundation that is set up by what we call a high net worth individual in Nigeria. Could you also make your own opening statements and locate it within the work that you are doing as a foundation?
Okay, Becky, thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this discussion. It was really good getting the recap from Musun about the discussions they had around food security, which is quite something important, which may not be at the front burner of a lot of work organizations around are doing. But I think more and more as people begin to hear about it, it will be an eye-opener, because for us here in Nigeria, it is something that you hear a lot in the media about the need for diversification, the need to invest more in agriculture, but it really has not reflected across board in terms of investment coming from private foundation and even from the private sector. So at the T.Y. Danjuma Foundation, we started initially with a couple of program areas, and one of those was income generation. We wanted to look at small agricultural scale projects, support them so that people at the grassroots can fend for themselves. But as it is the case with a lot of private institutions, somewhere midway we decided to narrow down to health and education, but with still a portfolio on humanitarian response. And it is under that portfolio that we are able to support issues around livelihood and food security. So Munso already made the point, when we had the pandemic early in the year, we had a lot of proposals sent to us. And the whole idea was for the foundation to make some form of donation, give food for those in need, and just walk into the IDP camps. If you looked also at the time at what people within the humanitarian sector were discussing about, it was a whole challenge of those who were displaced, especially in the Northeast where you have an armed conflict and people really trapped in IDP camps. So there was need to support especially those category of people. But it turned out also more and more we see there's the urban poor. There are people who are also trapped in urban areas who really cannot make ends meet. And with the restriction around movement, with the lockdown, those people are also in need. So the initial response from the foundation, and I guess from a lot of private institutions and even from government, was to give people something to eat, put something on the table first of all, while thinking about the long-term solution. So at the initial stage, that's what we did. But more and more, which will be the focus of my discussion, my introductory part of this discussion, more and more as we discuss with other colleagues in the humanitarian sector, we realized that we had to move from just putting something on the table and giving people real livelihood, investing in things that will make people be able to go back to farming. For example, giving them farming implement, giving them the tools, and just making it possible for people to go back to the farm. A critical part of this discussion, which struck me, was the fact that you had a lot of things being produced in the farms, but they get perished between the farm and the market, because people just can't get them to the market, people can't store them, and with the lockdown, it was just bad. So a lot of those things got bad in the farms. So it was also to look around that to see what access points can be created between the farms and the market. And I agree with you, why private institutions and private foundations have a role in playing in this. The major part of some of the discussions I had are things that government will have to invest in. So for example, I hear in one state in Nigeria where they produce a lot of fruit in the Middle Belt area. Those fruits get bad because people can't take them easily to Lagos, where there's a huge market, and it's a problem of access, transportation, and stuff like that. Those are for governments to do, state government and of course the federal government. But when it comes to seed, because we also heard people talking about improved seedlings so that, as we go towards the farming season, people can have more resistant seeds and be able to do farming as they would like to do. Those also points to the fact that there is a gap between research institutions, because across Nigeria, I have a whole lot of research institutions investing a whole lot into agricultural research, and the feedback from this institution probably is not getting to farmers at the grassroots. So there's a need for that connect between the output from research institution and the farmers, because without doing that, you have a whole lot of research out there, but government needs to act on it so that farmers are doing the right thing, getting the right seed and the right kind of products they need to get. And finally, from the research institution, we also learned that there is need to send agricultural extension workers, to give support to these farmers who will be able to learn from these people how best to produce their crops, how best to store, how best to transport, and market opportunities for all of this. Again, these are gaps that are things to be fixed between government and in some cases private sector. But largely, it's an investment for government to do. I think for a lot of the private institutions and private foundations that we talk with, the focus is on livelihood. People don't understand that you have a huge population that is trapped between unemployment and the willingness to work in the agricultural sector. Yet the sector is not that attractive. So if you make people see that it's not just a means of livelihood, but a means that is sustainable, I think lots of people will find it interesting to invest in agriculture, and which is something which the foundation is thinking about, because going forward, although we give support for food distribution in the Northeast, we are now thinking about what can we do that will go long term. Things like you give people crops, you give people animals, which they can now keep and then grow from there. Those are some of the things we are looking into. And for the post-harvest loss, the best we can do as an institution is to try and take it up in form of advocacy, because the investment required in that is huge, unless you have really some private individuals that would like to invest in that direction. It will quite be a challenge. It will still be a challenge for quite some time for farmers dealing with post-harvest loss. Now, just one last point I wanted to talk about. So it turns out that because of this lockdown, there's a program that had been in place in Nigeria for a while now, which is the homegrown school feeding program. And some private institutions, including us, have been part of it, which is basically about providing food for people in primary school so that they can concentrate in class and then also have a healthy diet at least once a day for some kids who will not be able to eat at home. We realized that because of this, a lot of people were now back at home and not learning because schools were locked down. Now they have to come back to school, and maybe lots of partners who were getting funding from outside the country with all the challenges right now, even in terms of movement, may not be able to provide the support that we're giving to some of these schools, which is something which we are looking at investing into for the last half of the year. and hopefully giving water points to those schools so that you can keep promoting the whole discussion around hygiene and sanitation as schools resume. But overall, I think that investment in agriculture is something which partners need to sit around the table, look at a sustainable way of funding beyond the kind of intervention I've mentioned, which is around giving food and giving donation, which I think is the point Cesar was trying to drive when he started his presentation. That would be it for my opening remarks.
Thank you, Kima, very much. I just want to remind the audience that we can use the chat function to post your comments, questions, and then we can read them back to the panelists. So there's a comment from Lee that says, season to season has been a way of farming because smallholder farmers have been excluded from value chains. And I think some of you have already addressed some of this. And there's a question from Tembi that says, the national infrastructure such as road networks affect the distribution of food. Are philanthropists or is philanthropy able to support both rural farmers looking to trade and government who are always, seem to be addressing issues of development, basically? And then I also want to ask a specific question to you, Gima, around, there's a lot of expectation that has been piled on foundations such as yourselves, among others. Is there a conversation that is happening between foundations of your nature, especially those led by African philanthropists like your chairman, T.Y. Danjuma? Is there a conversation that is taking place around how African philanthropists could collectively respond to a challenge that started as a medical challenge, but clearly it has evolved from being just a medical challenge to something much, much bigger? And maybe to Evans and Monsoon, given that you represent members of different sectors as well, we get a sense that the conversation is happening in different sectors, but is there a movement of some sort that is developing that could begin to champion some of the innovations that we have seen in the medical fraternity, for example, around contact tracing, the provision of accessible PPEs, among others? Is there a conversation among the associations that is pushing for different innovations in terms of addressing the overall impact of COVID-19, but as it pertains to food systems and food security? And of course, Cesar, you represent a community, and I just wanted to get a sense on, or maybe give the audience a sense of what the foundation representing a community spectrum is dealing with. What are the key priorities that are emerging from the communities across Kenya? So let's start with Gima, and then we go to Monsoon, Evans, and we end with Cesar.
Okay, thank you. So for the case of Nigeria, you had the Central Bank of Nigeria that convened a meeting of high net worth individuals and wanted them to contribute in responding to the crisis. So people who are like owners of banks and basically people within that category. And so a lot of them came together and pooled resources to provide personal protection equipment, food response, and all sorts of support in terms of building isolation centers and stuff like that. But going forward, they also went individually to respond, first of all, at their community level, and then in other parts of the country that is of interest to them. So in the case of our own founder and chairman, I know there was a huge donation to his state of origin so that across the state, people could have respite, some form of relief from the stress that COVID-19 put on them. And then we got also a lot of people requesting that testing centers be strengthened. So those are also some of the things which high net worth individuals were doing. But I think the good thing about Nigeria is that when long before this, you already had things like the Victim Support Fund that had been set up by the past administration, and you have these other committees set up by the current administration, which ought to have been the ones, leading under such circumstances. But I guess the sheer scale of the problem was so that this institution on their own could not handle. So you had response left and right and pulling together of people that government thought could be of support to it. Now, going forward, I'm not sure if the convening of this high net worth individual will be something that government will keep doing to continue to provide response. It seems that the response now is centralized by federal and state government. That's my understanding of the situation. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ima, for opening up that conversation. I want to start with the first question around infrastructure, and I think that largely depends on the position of government or the relationship of government with philanthropists in the various countries in which we operate across Africa. I have found that the ease of doing philanthropy varies from country to country. Even though some things are similar across board in Africa, some countries find it easier to work with government in the area of infrastructure and road construction, and all those facilities that make life easier for farmers or for entrepreneurs generally, if I would say. So really, in the end, it depends on how the countries are structured. And that is why at APF, one of the things we're doing, also in partnership with KCDF, it's pretty new, it's in the early stages, but one of the things that we're looking at are putting together information about is really how how philanthropy is evolving across countries in Africa, and we'll be able to understand the enablers of philanthropy and what also hinders philanthropy. And when the outcome of this would enable an organization like APF advocate from country to country and engage with governments and even at AU level on how we can improve philanthropic infrastructure across the continent so that philanthropists are able to do more than they are able to do now, and also to learn from countries that are working well with their respective governments, or philanthropies that are working well with respective governments. In terms of whether or not we have a movement out of the pandemic, I would say it's a good start. To be honest, as an African, it was a proud moment for me to see the way we all rose up as individuals, as churches, mosques, religious communities, the corporate bodies. Everybody felt like we were in this together. And so for me, that is a good start. Again, people, I think it was Caesar that made the point around how unsustainable that is. For how long are you going to call on individuals? For how long are you going to group and give palliatives and do food drives? But the good thing is we started doing something. And I do know that there are some philanthropies that have championed some initiatives. One of them is Tribe Masiyiwa, and some of us might know about the COVID, the PPE platform that was created where we're able to source for local PPEs and distribute around the continent. That's a fantastic initiative that, I hope will continue. Again, Tribe Masiyiwa is one of the philanthropies pre-pandemic that has been very much involved in promoting agriculture as a way for engaging young people. And so we're beginning to see conversations, and I would say that is the role that an organization like APF has to play to bring these various stakeholders together. Because what we find now is that the philanthropists are working in silos and not necessarily together, but we can do much more together, and that is what we're looking to do going forward at APF in terms of engaging with these philanthropists across the board. And something I failed to mention when I did the intro was that one of the things we did at the conference at APF was to showcase organizations, non-profit organizations that are working in the food security space. And so we selected through our networks several organizations across Africa. We shortlisted 6 of them from, I believe, from Malawi, from Zimbabwe, from Kenya, from South Sudan, just some countries across Africa. And we had a winner that was voted in by the network, and that winner came from Kenya, Farm Grow, and that organization is receiving all the proceeds from our registration fees. And we also have a GoFundMe page that we have launched. We didn't realize what we were doing when we did that. We just thought, oh, let's create awareness around this and let's support this one organization. But you will not believe I have started receiving calls. Even today, I've received calls from big corporations that are interested in food security saying, please connect us to the organizations, grassroots organizations, local organizations you have found working in food security. We want to work with them on food relief, COVID relief, and we need a trusted organization like APF to be the go-between. And I think that is, that's very encouraging. And I think we're sitting on something we didn't anticipate. And so we're looking to build on that and get more philanthropists on board in terms of supporting the various organizations that are working in the food in the food security space to be able to produce more for Africa as we continue to grow. And we're growing exponentially in Africa. So we cannot afford to take this for granted. It is a really, it's a situation that has to be treated with urgency. Otherwise, we would be faced with severe hunger in a few years. As I said in the opening, just 2025, we're looking at around the corner. There is a possibility that we'll only be able to feed 25%. That is scary. And so we all need to get on board. And I know that philanthropists find it a very urgent issue as well.
Thank you, Mosun. You've just solved one of my puzzles. I was watching a Nigerian skit yesterday about your president dishing out what they were calling palliatives. And now I understand what this was about. Anyway, having said that, though, there's a question from Marlon, and I want to add it to the next speakers, but I will also invite Gima and you, Mosun, to respond if you have time. Earlier on, I was part of the IPASA symposium, and the Gift of the Givers director gave a speech where he was saying in their response to the COVID-19, of course, they were interested in the medical side of things, the humanitarian side of things, in terms of food provision, among others. But in so doing, they also had to deal with the issue of drought, where they had to now provide stock feed to animals. It doesn't look very much related to COVID-19, but it's a bigger component of what could happen if issues of climate change are not addressed. And the question from Marlon is, there's a clear link that you raised, Mosun, between philanthropy and climate change. To what extent is philanthropy addressing climate change and its impact on African communities? Are there possible avenues and partners that can be deployed to reduce dependency on global North solutions? So Evans and then Caesar, and then if we have time, we'll come back to Gima and Mosun.
Thank you so much, Prof. I just want to refer to an article that we did from the East Africa Philanthropy Data Portal. And from the data in that portal in the East Africa region, agriculture as a sector is coming number 2, taking 23.6% of the funding that came into this region in the recent past. Very interesting data. One of our members, Hivos Foundation, is giving data that within this time of COVID-19, there's been a 50% reduction in workforce in major agricultural production units. That is something that should worry us, considering that in the next 4 years, by the year 2025, the population of this continent will be around 1.5 billion. So the demand is increasing and the supply is facing the challenges that has come with COVID-19. And even before COVID-19, there were many issues which the sector was already dealing with in terms of food security. And so the series of convenings that we have been having in this part of the region have been very interesting. And one of the things that came out was this question by everyone who was participating, that how do we convert those small investments that philanthropy has been making to the sector into strategic long-term strategies that will then ensure that even with another pandemic, we will not be caught unawares. And so there have been many issues which have come up before I come to the question that you directed to me. And one of the things that was agreed on and that so many partners are coming together to work on is the need to support small-scale food producers. And this, they've identified 3 areas. That is the areas of farm input, knowledge, and financial services, connecting that with the market and the opportunities which are arising from the value chain addition. The second thing which has come out is how do we work closely? One of the speakers mentioned about philanthropy always working in silos. So how do we ensure that philanthropy, government, and of course the private sector comes together and approach the issue of food security in a holistic manner that will ensure that there is sustainability in the issues that we are talking about and any way that we can put in place to mitigate these risks and challenges that we are talking about. The last thing that has come out in the conversations we have been having is how do we improve collection, storage, analysis of quality and accessible agricultural data? And how do we convert these in terms of artificial intelligence to all the stakeholders in the sector and in the food system that we are discussing today? So 3 very critical issues that philanthropy needs to take into consideration as we explore matters food security. But now, Prof, back to the question that you asked. I think from the conversations that we have been having, we have seen some coming together of philanthropy actors around 3 areas, which already we are seeing results around. And one is in the area of information and technology. We've talked about knowledge repeatedly. How do we increase access to the inputs? How do we increase access to the available markets? How do we increase knowledge on the opportunities which are available on value addition? So we have seen a lot of philanthropic foundations in this region coming together to come up with technological solutions which connect the demand and the supply side. That is one thing that we have seen. And so there's flow and real-time data on these issues that we are talking about. And this has been driven by the need to reduce uncertainties and reduce also the risks that are associated with production of food. The second thing that I see is catalytic investments being driven through the partnerships that we are talking about. And one of the things that I talked about earlier was blended finance. And we have seen a lot of foundations coming together. One of them is the Rockefeller Foundation, leading these conversations and bringing together, exploring opportunities available that we can explore as philanthropy in financing matters food security. And lastly, because of time, is the matter of good practices. You know, how do we ensure that as philanthropy, we promote the adoption of good practices, specifically around post-harvest handling practices? And that is one thing that I've seen a lot of foundations in this part of the region coming together to just ensure that even after production, there is proper handling and those best practices are shared within the agricultural sector to ensure that we deal with some of these issues that we are talking about. Back to you.
Thank you, Cesar. Let's get your thoughts and your reflections. You're on mute. You're on mute.
So very quickly, allow me to just share briefly about KCDF in my first minute. And we began in 1995-97 when Kenya was receiving a lot of overseas development, but largely the structure was that aid was structured to do things for people. and people and communities will end up abandoning those projects because they did not necessarily speak to their aspirations. And so in that particular ecosystem, a group of people felt strongly that there was need to begin taking a more bolder control in how philanthropy is done. And that could only be possible if there was a deliberate investment in capacity of Africans to give for Africans, but also allow others to chime in into that particular pathway, but allow indigenous organizations or communities, not just the organizations themselves, to be at the forefront in making the decisions on how they would use those available resources. And so at the very early years, we began investing in capacity, in philanthropy, then organize ourselves eventually in different thematic areas, livelihoods, food security, education, youth. And so in the context of what we are discussing today, if I can quickly go back to that, is that we have found a role as a foundation, as a public foundation, to kind of try ensure that the voice of communities is not ignored when philanthropists are making decisions. So how can we make information available? Sometimes how can we be in the table, or how can we elevate some of our partners to be at the table where such decisions are made? And that's how, at a very early age, actually by the second week at KCDF, we had already restructured our calls for proposals and everything else, because what we were hearing on the ground was more around an integrated approach that takes advantage of seasonality. It was a planting season in some areas and things like that. And so how do you then ensure that you don't ignore such opportunities as you are running to address the immediate? Then the other key thing that we added was what I would call systemic change. And so it is very difficult for you to address food security issues or broadly development challenges if government is not at the center of it. And so one of the things that has really helped is ensuring that as we map out interventions for our communities, we are very clear what are some of the things that government is able to do. There are taxes, there are projects within government. And so how do you elevate and mobilize communities to be able to either sit at the table where those decisions are making, advocate for it? And that's how you can be able to get wins on bigger projects around roads where a lot of philanthropies might not be focusing on. And so there's need, as we have this discussion on food security, that we ensure that government, and not just the Ministry of Agriculture, but different ministries. There's a Ministry of Road, there's health, all those things, there's industry. All these things play a role in enhancing the livelihoods of a family, and food security is key to that particular conversation. And so in our conversations with partners, what we are hearing and what we have been hearing from communities is a more increased desire for support around farm inputs. With the pandemic, most of the immediate income flows were disrupted. A lot of rural families have one family member working in Nairobi and things like that. And so remittances from the small urban centers or those who are working were also affected. And so what it meant is that this tendency where people wait, and when it is about planting season, then they are making telephone calls to their social networks for seeds and farm input. Now that is not necessarily available. So how do you support such families? Of course, then with capacity for how they can then make sure that doesn't become cyclic. We are hearing a lot of requests for extension support, access to land, value addition, and most importantly, food security in the urban centers is not necessarily about planting, but sometimes it's around that business, that opportunity that a person is engaged in. So again, how do you then ensure that those families that consumed their savings are able to access credit through alternative financing mechanisms? And so those are all the things that we are hearing. But another important one that I wouldn't want not to speak to is that with COVID, a lot of grassroots organizations received overwhelming support from philanthropists, from communities, from individual givers. But there's a worry that they do not have the requisite capability or capacity to retain those networks for giving for more projects as we step into the future. And so one of the things that we are also investing as much as we are talking about communities is the organizations themselves, so that they begin consolidating all this emerging social capital for development, being more credible organizations, looking at their communications, their fundraising strategies, and all those things have a direct correlation to how then communities and people, communities step into the future in the context of food security.
Thank you, Caesar. So as we draw towards the end, I just want to pose 3 questions, and you can choose any question that you feel comfortable with. So the first question is, you have all mentioned moving from response to preparedness. Where do you see opportunities for long-term mitigation against pandemics of this nature going forward? The second is, how do we as Africans build food systems that are not only resilient, but can support the needs of both our regional and global communities? So what we have seen is countries looking inwards in terms of responding to COVID and in terms of the service provision. But how do we move from that and build systems that are not just focused on us, but they are focused on making sure that the entire African continent is actually supported going forward? And then finally, what are the key points or messages that you want the audience to take away from your interventions, especially given the work that you do in your different contexts and different geographies? And again, Mosun and Kima, if you want to respond to the issue of climate change and philanthropy, please do so. So let's start with Mosun, Kima, and then we go that way again.
I think on climate change, I more or less touched on it when I spoke. It is not a very sexy topic for philanthropists, but we're beginning to get into that space. I think it's a question of communication and positioning. You know, for as long as philanthropists and Africans see climate change as a Western issue, something that is far from there, something that is happening at the ice, at the Arctic Circle, where ice caps are melting, and they don't understand the impact on Africa, they wouldn't get involved. But if we begin to communicate it in a way that it is real and they can identify with, then they get involved. And that's why at the APF conference, we chose to focus day 2 on, initially, we actually were going to focus on climate change. But because we understood our audience, we rephrased it to be the impact of climate change on food security, which we knew would get our members engaged. So it's really about making them see the immediacy of climate change to us in Africa, and not as a Western issue. So it's a journey, and I think we have started well with this conference. Is just to build on the momentum that was generated last week and get more people on board. I think I'll speak to the opportunities there are. One of the good things that happened during this pandemic is that I think for the very first time, we really began to gather data. There's so much information around who gave what, where, in which country, which locations where was food being given. And so that culture of data gathering that we started or that we built on during the pandemic is an opportunity that we should leverage going forward, especially in the philanthropic community, because we lack a lot of data. Even though a lot of giving goes on in Africa, because it is undocumented, we are unable to aggregate information that shows how much giving is going on the African continent. In terms of preparedness, opportunities are bound. We spoke about food security and a little bit about health, but I think I want to, because we have spoken about food security quite a bit, it's important to talk about health and also education. I think those are areas, those are opportunity areas that have emerged in this season and in this period. And there's an interconnectedness between food security and education and even health. If you're not eating well, if you're not eating nutritious food, you're unable to learn, you're unable to grow, you're unable to be healthy. But when we talk about, the reason I raised education is mainly around digital learning, because we were totally unprepared for this. It took months for schools to be able to catch up with the rest of the world on going virtual, especially government schools. Those are areas of opportunities for philanthropists to get on board, and also in terms of our fragile health systems, because it was bursting in its seams, especially at the beginning, because we didn't have adequate trained personnel. I don't know about the situation in Kenya or in South Africa, but we have seen massive brain drain in Nigeria in the medical space. A lot of medical personnel have moved out of the country. We need to be able to attract these people, ensure that they are well trained, ensure that we are prepared in terms of medical infrastructure as well, to be able to cope with anything that happens in future. I think those are the areas of opportunities that I think we've not really touched on, and I think it's important that we raise before we close. And then finally, what do I want to leave us with? I always say that we are all philanthropists. You know, we cannot continue to wait for the super rich to give. We all need to give. We all need to contribute in our various communities so that we have critical mass. And that's what the most advanced countries, it is not the big dollars and millions that come from the big donors don't make up the bulk of the giving. The bulk of the giving come from like middle-class Americans, come from religious societies, or people going to churches and stuff like that. So it's important that we begin to take this even more seriously, and we're more strategic. I know we're a giving society where we have a culture of giving in Africa, but we can become more strategic about it, and we shouldn't wait for the Strive Masiyiwas or the Dangotes or the T.Y. Danjumas when there is a need. All of us have a role to play, and every penny we contribute really goes a long way.
Thank you, Mosun. I know I said give your takeaway points, but there's a question that has come up and I want you to think about it. We'll come back to you. And it's from Maseko, which is that is philanthropy involved in supporting farmers to develop local seed varieties that are resilient to climate change? I'm posing this question to you, but I also pose to others because you have a diverse set of members, some of whom are entrepreneurs in different sectors. And so I will come back to you to give your views on this. And mainly this is really to address the issue around the monopoly that is growing in the area of the seed sector. And whether or not philanthropy is actually doing that or is prepared to fund seed varieties that will be very much resilient to climate change. Gima, can I come to you to get your responses on this question and any of the questions that you might want to respond to and your takeaway points?
Okay, thank you. I think I would like to add my voice to the discussion around climate change because this is something critical we will have to deal with. And like Muso was mentioning, whether we find it sexy or not, we will have to live with it and deal with it. And clearly there are things that require cross-border collaboration between countries. So this is really one of those areas where philanthropies and development partners will have to look beyond national borders. So I wanted to point the case of the Sahel zone, and you look at what is happening in Nigeria and in fact in the region. So in Nigeria, you have a program called the Great Green Wall Program, which is basically to build an embankment, trees, from the northwestern part of the country, the northeastern part of the Sahel North, in order to halt the advancement of the Sahara Desert. It's a program that cannot be done just in Nigeria and you forget the neighboring country of Cameroon or Niger or Chad, because then the desert will say encroach from somewhere. And this is a clear opportunity where philanthropists and others interested in climate change can also, support government or hold government into account by making sure that government is doing what its pledge is going to do. Because there's an agency set up for this, there's a council for this, and in fact, they are operating at the federal level, at the state level, and even at the level of local government. And I understand for all the other countries in West Africa, they want to do the same thing. This has a whole lot of value change in terms of afforestation, planting of trees, diversification of livelihoods around there so that people don't go cutting all the shrubs there to use them as firewood, and providing alternative means of livelihood, water supply, and stuff like that. So there's a whole range of opportunity there for people to invest. But I completely agree with Musuda, because this is not something which people want to talk so much about climate change, and because of competing need for resources, this a lot of time is not at the focus of discussion. But I think there are opportunities for people to monitor, hold government to account, support government, or really fund some of the projects and intervention that come with some of these opportunities.
Thank you. Let's come to you, Evans, and then we go to Caesar.
Thank you so much. It is estimated that by the year 2025, 61% of the population in Africa will have access to mobile internet. And as we know, majority of the players in the food security equation are players in the rural areas, our fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters in the villages. And so I see an opportunity in terms of investing in information technology that will connect the demand and the supply side in meeting food security. What am I talking about? There is an opportunity, and we already see a lot of trend, specifically in Kenya, where a lot of philanthropic actors are investing in this opportunity, excuse me, to ensure that the available food and markets right from the rural areas to the urban areas are connected and taking advantage of growth in IT. So I see a big opportunity in that area for philanthropy. I also see an opportunity in terms of philanthropy joining forces with government to ensure that we build the strategic food reserves, which is a huge area of interest, that for us to have sustainable food production going into the future, then we must look at the issues of building and strengthening the strategic food reserve. So that is an opportunity that we need to jump into. Lastly, talking about climate changes, there is need for us as philanthropy in our partnerships with the government, with the private sector, to promote the use of organic agriculture. I feel that there is an opportunity there in terms of having long-term preservation of environment and reducing the adverse effects of climate changes. So I also see an opportunity there. Lastly, in my parting shots, there is a need for philanthropy to rise up to the occasion. There's need for us as philanthropy to work very closely with the private sector, with the government, in a very collaborative manner to ensure that we deal with this food security issue in a very strategic and sustainable manner. And so these conversations are important. Organizations like APF, EAPN, the Africa Philanthropy Network, we need to continually provide platforms like what we are having today to engage the various actors that support the conversation that we are having around food security. Thank you, and back to you, Prof.
Thank you. Caesar, your last words and takeaway points.
Yeah. So recently at KCDF we decided to have a reflection based on literature, our experiences, and we just wanted to kind of discuss what are the tenets of philanthropy, or what I would call foundationism. And so one of the interesting things is that many people tend to think that it is largely around giving, but there's a very huge pillar around the capability of communities and people to care about each other, and another big pillar around organizing, the ability of communities to go to their local authorities and demand or negotiate for services, things like that. And so for me, what I see as a very big opportunity is the one around, with the devolution in Kenya, a lot of resources are being devolved. And so there's a lot of opportunity for food security and all the things that we do if we can correctly leverage on the emerging community grassroots mechanisms to lobby, to organize, so that then many programs in agriculture by government and other state offices are more aligned to the priorities of communities. So that for me, I think is what is the biggest one. But lastly is that as philanthropy actors, let's not forget to consolidate the gains of the emerging social capital that we have seen as a result of COVID. Let's rely on data, let's rely on whatever we can, but at the end of the day, we still need to invest in the organizations and in the philanthropy ecosystem to make it strong and strong at the bottom.
Thank you very much, Caesar and everyone else. We are coming to an end, and I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that philanthropy is everyone. It is a big glue that binds our societies together, and it expresses itself in different forms. In Rwanda, for example, 1 cow per poor family is a local initiative that the people in Rwanda have adopted in order to address different needs around eradicating poverty, but addressing issues around nutrition and so forth and so on. So that's one form in which you could easily look at it and say, how do we make sure that each and every community or each and every family within a community has access to a cow, and that cow assists with farming through manure, through milk for kids and among others. But it also expresses itself in cooperatives, societies in different communities. During the planting and farming season, communities come together to actually help those that don't have the tools of trade. And in one day, they can clear the land, plant it, or harvest. That's another form in which philanthropy expresses itself. During this time of COVID, burial societies have been another form through which people have managed to deal with the most difficult time of their lives. But burial societies actually help to pool resources to actually deal with that. And it is at that point also that the interface with food systems is also clearly demonstrated. It also takes a form of savings, stock fails in the concept of Southern Africa, among others. So it's not just about the institutions that are represented here today, from the high net worth individuals to the associations to the community foundations. It's much broader than that. And I think that as we think about the role that philanthropy can play in building systems that could resist the climate change effects, but as well as be in a position to support the needs of our regional and global communities, we need to think along the lines that philanthropy it manifests itself in different ways. And so there's a role for each and every component of philanthropy in addressing the current challenges that we have. So I want to end by thanking the panelists, Mosun from the Africa Philanthropy Forum, for the generous time that you have given and the insights that you gave, both from your recent conference, but also from your day-to-day work with the members that we have across the continent. Evans from the East Africa Philanthropy Network. We know you are a building block of the Africa Philanthropy Network, and again, within that spectrum, there are a number of members that belong to your association that have an interface with this question. Gima from the T.Y. Danjuma Foundation. Even though you are speaking on behalf of the T.Y. Danjuma Foundation, there's a huge expectation that our high net worth individuals and those that have made sustainable, rather a big amounts of resources from the continent need to plow back to society, but in very effective ways, and also tilt the current movement where a lot of support, a lot of innovations seem to be financed by international funders, when we do actually have funders in the continent that could leave that kind of innovation, creativity, and the building of resilient systems. And then finally, to thank Caesar from the Kenya Community Development Foundation, which is a model across the continent that seems to be very much connected to what is happening at the community level. And communities seem to find resonance with the Community Foundation's model. And so there's no fragmentation between what communities want and what the foundations are doing when you use the Community Foundation's model. And finally, I want to thank the partners behind this webinar, the Society Talks that I introduced in the beginning, the Southern Africa Trust, the Mandela Institute for Development Studies, the Grasa Machel Trust, and of course, the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment. And today we're joined by Impulse Radio. Our gratitude goes also to the radio station that is streaming this conversation live. With those words, let me thank everyone and wish you a good afternoon, a good evening, and a good morning wherever you are. Thank you, everyone, and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.